The ring was still warm when Jimin found it half buried in the snow. The silver band lay on the frozen ground like a secret the winter had failed to swallow, glinting beneath the pale wash of moonlight, its surface dusted with ice and trembling in Jimin's bare palm as if it had only just slipped from someone's hand. His breath caught so sharply it hurt. Around him, the world had gone silent in the way only snow could silence it, thick, watchful, endless, no footsteps, no voices. No sign of the man who had been standing beside him less than a minute ago. Jungkook, his voice vanished into the white. The wind answered first, cutting through the dark pine trees with a low, hollow cry. Jimin turned in a tight circle, pulse pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Just moments ago, Jungkook had been there, close enough for Jimin to feel the warmth of his coat sleeve brushing his hand, close enough for his breath to cloud between them in the winter dark. 1 second he had been there, quiet and unreadable, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the trees. The next, nothing, only snow, only silence, only the ring. Jimin's fingers curled around it. It was unmistakably Jungkook's. The ring was simple, silver, worn smooth at the edges from years of habit. Jungkook had never taken it off, not when he slept, not when he showered, not even when he was angry enough to slam doors and disappear for hours into the city with his phone turned off. He used to twist it when he was anxious, spin it with his thumb when he was thinking, press it absently against his lips when he was afraid to say what he meant. Jimin had watched him do it 1,000 times, so why was it here and where was Jungkook? The cold bit through Jimin's skin, but he barely felt it. He scanned the clearing again, every muscle drawn tight. The forest stretched around him in a ring of black silhouettes, the trees tall and unmoving, their branches heavy with snow. Their cabin stood several yards behind him, warm yellow light glowing faintly through frosted windows, impossibly calm against the violence blooming in his chest. They had come here to breathe. That was what Jungkook had said when he'd suggested the trip, his voice soft and careful in the kitchen 3 days ago, as though speaking too loudly might shatter whatever fragile thing still existed between them. Let's leave Seoul for a while, just a few days, just us. Jimin should have known then that Jungkook was planning something, not because Jungkook was cruel. He was, that had always been the problem. Jungkook could lie, could disappear behind silence so complete it felt like a locked room, but cruelty had never fit him. Even now in memory, Jungkook remained unbearable in his tenderness. The way he folded Jimin's scarf before handing it to him. The way he set tea beside Jimin's elbow without interrupting his thoughts. The way he looked at him sometimes, like loving him had become a wound he no longer knew how to close. Jimin had spent the last year pretending not to notice. He had become very good at pretending. Pretending he didn't hear Jungkook packing the apartment at 3 a.m. Pretending he didn't notice the unread messages lighting Jungkook's phone. Pretending not to see the way Jungkook stared too long at old photographs, at train stations, at exits. Pretending not to recognize grief when it sat down between them at dinner and stayed. The snow shifted behind him. Jimin spun so fast his boots nearly slipped. Nothing, only a line of disturbed snow near the trees. His breath stalled there. A trail, not footprints exactly, more like something dragged. A broken line carved shallowly into the snow, vanishing between the dark trunks. Jimin stared at it, every instinct screaming at once. Jungkook had gone into the woods, or someone had taken him there. Body moved before thought could catch it. Jimin shoved the ring into his coat pocket and ran. Branches clawed at his sleeves as he pushed through the trees, boots sinking into drifts deep enough to numb his ankles. The forest swallowed sound, but not completely. There was the sharp crack of ice beneath his steps, the rasp of his breath, the frantic beat of blood in his ears, and beneath it, fainter, wrong, another sound, a metallic chime. Jimin stopped so abruptly his lungs burned. It came again, soft. Irregular, familiar, his hand flew to his pocket. Empty except for the ring. Then he heard it clearly, a bell not far ahead. Jungkook hated bells. The memory struck hard and immediate. Jungkook at 19, pale in a hospital corridor, flinching every time the chapel bells rang on the hour across the street. He had laughed it off when Jimin asked, but later in the dark admitted he hated the sound because it reminded him of endings, funerals, last rites, things that came too late. Jimin pushed forward faster. The trees thinned without warning. A frozen lake opened before him, vast and silver under the moon, its surface gleaming like glass. At its center stood a small wooden dock half swallowed by frost, and there at the edge of it was Jungkook. Relief hit so violently Jimin nearly collapsed. Turned even from a distance, something was wrong. He stood too still, shoulders rigid, face bloodless in the moonlight. Snow clung to his dark hair and lashes, melting slowly against skin gone pale with cold. He was staring at Jimin but not moving toward him. Then Jimin saw the red on his sleeve. Everything inside him dropped. Jimin ran onto the ice before his mind could stop him. Jungkook's voice cut across the lake, sharp enough to freeze blood. Jimin stopped. The ice groaned beneath his feet. For one terrible second, neither of them moved. Then Jungkook lifted his uninjured hand, and Jimin saw what he was holding. A small black phone, not his own. The screen glowed in the dark. Jungkook's expression was unreadable, but his eyes were not. Fear lived there. Fear and something worse, resignation. They found me, Jungkook said. The words landed like a blow. Jimin stared at him, chest heaving. Who? Jungkook gave a soft, broken laugh that held no humor at all. The sound of it made Jimin colder than the wind. I wanted one quiet week before it caught up to me. Bell rang again, closer now, not from the forest, from the phone. Jimin's skin turned to ice. The ringtone was old-fashioned, almost delicate. A church bell chime. Jungkook looked down at it like it was a loaded weapon, then very carefully he said, "Jimin, if it rings a fourth time, run." Felt the world tilt beneath him. The wind tore across the frozen lake, carrying with it the distant smell of smoke. The third bell rang before Jimin could speak. Its thin, chiming note sliced through the frozen air and seemed to settle into Jimin's bones, cold and metallic and wrong. Jungkook did not move. He stood at the edge of the dock like a man listening for a verdict, his blood-dark sleeves stirring in the wind, his gaze fixed on the phone in his hand as if it might explode. Jimin took one careful step forward. The ice groaned beneath him, a low animal sound from somewhere deep below the frozen surface. "Jungkook," he said, forcing the tremor out of his voice. "Tell me what's happening." Jungkook's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. It was the expression he wore when the truth sat too heavy on his tongue. "I tried to leave it behind," he said quietly. "I thought if I disappeared first, it might not follow you." Wind swept hard across the lake, carrying snow in silver sheets around them. Jimin's heart was hammering too fast, too hard. Every instinct told him to run to him, grab him, drag him off the ice and back into the cabin and lock every door. But Jungkook's face stopped him. There was no panic in it now, only a kind of exhausted certainty that frightened Jimin more than fear ever could. Leave what behind? Jungkook looked at him for a long moment, and Jimin saw something in his eyes he had not seen in months, the terrible softness of surrender. "Aim," Jungkook said. The words made no sense. Jimin stared at him, breath clouding in the dark. "What?" Jungkook lowered the phone slowly, his fingers white around it. 3 years ago, before I met you, I worked for someone I should have run from sooner." The bell remained silent, but its echo still rang in Jimin's head. Jungkook's voice was steady, but Jimin knew him too well not to hear what trembled beneath it. It started small. Courier jobs, deliveries. No questions asked, no names exchanged. Money in envelopes. Phones I was told not to answer. I was young enough to think being useful was the same as being safe. Jimin's stomach turned to ice. Jungkook had always been careful with the past. Too careful. He offered fragments when asked, little pieces polished smooth enough not to cut. Jimin had never pressed too hard. He had mistaken silence for privacy. He was beginning to understand it had been something closer to damage control. "One night," Jungkook said, "I was given something I wasn't supposed to open." His fingers tightened around the ringing phone. "I did." Wind sharpened. Snow hissed across the ice like whispered warnings. It was a ledger, names, payments, people who disappeared after they stopped being useful. Politicians, police, journalists, men who smiled in photographs and buried bodies where no one would think to look. Jimin's mouth went dry. "And you took it," he said, because he already knew. Jungkook gave one hollow nod. "I copied everything and ran." Felt the cold deepen under his skin. That explained the sudden moves, the new phone every few months. The way Jungkook always sat facing doors. The way he memorized exits in restaurants without seeming to look. The flinch at unfamiliar footsteps outside their apartment. The nights he woke gasping, eyes unfocused, searching the dark for something Jimin could never see. Not paranoia, preparation. "They've been looking for me ever since," Jungkook said. Not loudly, not publicly, quietly, patiently, like winter. Jimin's throat tightened so hard it hurt. "And you never told me." Looked at him then, really looked at him, and all at once he seemed younger and older at once, like every year of carrying this alone had carved something raw and permanent into him. "I loved you before I knew how to tell you the truth," he said. "And after that, every day I waited became another reason not to." Jimin could not breathe around the force of it. Anger rose first, hot and blinding, but beneath it was something worse, the sickening clarity of how afraid Jungkook must have been. Not of dying, of being known fully and left for it. Jimin wanted to scream at him, wanted to cross the ice and strike his chest and demand why he had carried this alone, wanted to drag him close and never let go again. Instead he said, voice breaking despite himself, "You let me build a life around a fire I couldn't see." Jungkook flinched. It was small, barely visible, but Jimin saw it and regret hit him instantly like a bruise. Before either of them could speak again, the fourth bell rang. The sound was impossibly loud. Jungkook's face changed. "Run." The ice cracked. A gunshot split the night. The sound came from the trees behind Jungkook, sharp and deafening, and the bullet tore through the wooden post beside his shoulder in an explosion of splinters. Jimin dropped instinctively, the crack of the shot still echoing through the forest. Birds burst screaming from the black pines. Jungkook moved at last. "Down," he shouted. Another shot. The ice near Jimin's knee shattered in a spray of white. Cold shock ripped through him as one leg plunged knee-deep into freezing water. He gasped, clawing backward, pain lancing up his bones so violently his vision flashed white. The ice groaned beneath him, fractured and unstable. Figures emerged from the trees, 3 of them. Dark coats, measured steps. Faces obscured by shadow and snow, not rushing, certain. Jimin's pulse slammed against his ribs. Jungkook ran toward him. A third shot cracked through the air and Jungkook staggered. Jimin's scream tore itself out before he knew he'd made a sound. Jungkook hit the ice hard, the black phone skidding from his hand and spinning across the frozen surface. No, Jimin dragged himself forward, ignoring the freezing water soaking through his boot, ignoring the screaming protest of the ice beneath him. Every breath burned, every second stretched into something monstrous. Jungkook pushed himself up with one arm, teeth clenched, blood blooming dark across his side now, too much of it, too fast. Move, Jungkook shouted, voice ragged. The men were already on the ice. Jimin reached Jungkook just as the first one raised his gun again, then the lake broke. The sound was not a crack but a roar. The ice beneath the nearest man split open in a jagged black line, swallowing one leg to the thigh. He shouted, stumbling violently as the surface gave way under him. The second man lurched sideways. The third fired and missed as the entire lake groaned and fractured in every direction. Jimin grabbed Jungkook under the arm. Get up. Jungkook was half dead weight against him, warm blood soaking through Jimin's gloves, but adrenaline made monsters of ordinary men. Jimin hauled him upright and dragged him across the screaming ice as gunshots cracked wild behind them, and the lake came apart in splintering sheets. Water surged black through widening fractures. The docks snapped. One of the men vanished into the freezing dark with a sound Jimin would hear in nightmares. He did not look back. The shore slammed into them in a blur of snow and breath and pain. Jimin half-carried, half-dragged Jungkook into the trees as the frozen lake broke open behind them like shattered glass. They ran blind through the forest, branches striking their faces, lungs tearing in their chests, the night alive now with shouts and splintering ice and the terrible certainty of pursuit. Jungkook stumbled hard, nearly taking them both down. Cabin, Jimin gasped. Jungkook's hand seized his wrist. No, Jimin turned. Breathless, Jungkook's face had gone ghost pale, his voice barely more than air. They'll expect the cabin. Then through the trees ahead, Jimin saw it, a narrow light moving between the pines, not the warm gold of the cabin, a lantern. Someone was already waiting in the woods.
Jimin stopped so abruptly that Jungkook nearly collapsed against him. The lantern swung once between the trees, a dim amber arc cutting through the dark, then steadied. Whoever held it did not call out, did not move closer. Just stood there in the narrow corridor of black pines, the light low and patient as if they had been waiting for this exact moment. Jimin's pulse thundered in his throat. Behind them, the lake groaned like a wounded thing. Men shouted across the cracking ice, their voices broken by distance and wind. Somewhere in the dark, wood splintered. A gunshot echoed once, then silence swallowed it whole. Jimin tightened his grip around Jungkook's waist. He could feel the heat of blood through both their coats now, terrifyingly warm in the winter cold. Who is that? Jimin whispered. Jungkook's breath hitched. For the first time since the gunshots, Jimin felt Jungkook freeze, not from cold, not from pain, but from recognition. The lantern lifted. Its glow caught the lower half of a face first, pale skin, a wool scarf drawn high over the mouth, dark eyes unreadable beneath the shadow of a hood. Then the figure spoke. You're late. A woman, her voice was calm, low, threaded with impatience so familiar it struck something immediate and buried in Jungkook's expression. Not fear, not surprise, memory. Jungkook's hand tightened painfully around Jimin's sleeve. Panic, the woman said, glancing past them toward the sound of distant pursuit. You've got maybe 90 seconds before they reach shore. Stared at her, every nerve lit with suspicion. She was slight, shorter than Jimin by several inches, wrapped in a dark coat dusted with snow. No visible weapon, no wasted movement, the kind of stillness that came from either discipline or danger, possibly both. She stepped forward just enough for the lantern to catch the edge of her face. Jungkook made a sound Jimin had never heard from him before, not relief, not disbelief, something more fragile. Yuna, the woman's gaze flicked to him, and for the first time something shifted in her expression. Not softness exactly, but something close enough to hurt. You look terrible, she said. Jungkook let out a breath that almost became a laugh, then folded hard with pain. Jimin caught him before he hit the snow. The woman, Yuna, closed the distance instantly, dropping to one knee beside them. Her hands moved with efficient precision, already pressing hard against Jungkook's side before Jimin could protest. Jungkook hissed through his teeth. Still dramatic, Yuna murmured, checking the wound with quick, practiced hands. Good, that means you're alive. Stared at her. Who are you? She didn't look at him. The reason he survived as long as he did. Shout echoed from the lake, closer now. Yuna looked up sharply. You can interrogate me after we stop him from bleeding out. Move. Was something in her tone that cut clean through panic, command sharpened by urgency. She stood and thrust the lantern into Jimin's hand. Follow the light, step where I step, do not leave the trail. Then she turned and disappeared into the trees. Jimin hesitated only once. Jungkook was fadding against him, his weight heavier now, his breath shallow and uneven. There was no time left for trust to be earned properly. Only chosen. Jimin followed. The path Yuna took was nearly invisible, a narrow cut through the forest hidden beneath fresh snow and low branches. Without the lantern, Jimin would never have seen it. It twisted sharply between pines, veering away from the cabin, away from the lake, deeper into the woods where the dark thickened and the cold turned strange. Quieter somehow, less touched by wind. Yuna moved fast, never looking back, always certain. Jimin dragged Jungkook after her, each step a fight. His soaked boot had gone numb. His lungs burned, branches tore at his coat and hair. More than once he nearly lost his footing under Jungkook's weight, but they kept moving. Behind them voices entered the trees, distant, searching. Yuna heard them too. Jimin could tell by the way her shoulders sharpened, by how quickly she altered course, cutting left through a stand of dense cedar where the branches hung low enough to erase tracks. She knew how to disappear. That frightened Jimin almost as much as the men with guns. The trees opened without warning. A structure emerged from the dark, not a cabin, a chapel, small and old and impossibly out of place. It stood in the center of the clearing like something forgotten by time. Stone walls silvered with frost, narrow windows black with age, a steep roof heavy with snow. A single wooden door marked by years and weather and silence. At its peak hung a bell. Jimin stopped cold. No wind touched it. Still it swayed, once, twice, the same bell, the same chime. Yuna reached the door first and shoved it open. Inside, didn't move. Every instinct in him recoiled. The bell, the phone, the calls, the sound Jungkook hated. This place was wrong. It had been waiting long before they arrived. Yuna turned, saw his hesitation, and for the first time her calm fractured. If they find you out here, he dies in the snow. Decide faster. That broke the spell. Jimin dragged Jungkook inside. The warmth hit first, not true warmth but air untouched by wind, thick with dust and wax and old wood. The chapel smelled of extinguished candles and damp stone. Moonlight spilled through narrow stained glass windows in fractured bands of blue and red, painting the floor in broken color. At the far end stood an altar stripped bare, no cross, no icon, only a single black telephone resting at its center. Jimin stopped breathing. It was old, glossy, perfectly still. Its cord disappeared into the stone. No dust touched it. Yuna slammed the door shut behind them and dropped the iron bolt into place. The sound rang through the chapel like judgment. Jimin stared at the phone. No one spoke for a long second. Then Jungkook, half conscious against him, lifted his head and looked at it, and all the blood left his face. He whispered. Yuna turned sharply. Jungkook's voice broke on the word, terror tearing clean through the pain-hazed fog in his eyes. No, this isn't where I came from. Looked at him. What does that mean? Jungkook was staring at the phone like it had a pulse. His breath came too fast now, panic cracking through whatever control he had left. I copied the ledger, he said, voice raw, but I didn't steal it from them. The chapel seemed to go colder. Jimin felt the silence shift. Yuna went still. Then very carefully she asked, who did you steal it from? Jungkook's eyes never left the black telephone. When it rang the first time, he whispered, I was already too late. No one moved. The chapel held silence the way a wound held blood, thick, pressurized, waiting to split open. Snow hissed softly against the stained glass windows. Somewhere above them, the bell swayed once more with a hollow, breathless sound. Jimin kept one arm locked around Jungkook. But his eyes were on the black telephone. It sat at the altar like an offering left for something that had never been holy. Yuna was the first to move. She crossed the chapel in 3 measured steps and yanked open the drawer built into the side of the altar. Inside lay a folded strip of cloth, a rusted key, and a pistol wrapped in yellowing paper. She took the pistol without hesitation, checked the chamber, and tucked it into the back of her coat. Only then did she look at Jungkook. You told me the ledger came from a courier exchange in Busan. Jungkook laughed once, breathless and pained. I lied. Yuna's expression hardened, but not with surprise, Mori with confirmation. Of course you did. Looked between them, pulse pounding with a new rising fury. You two want to stop speaking like I'm not here. Jungkook shut his eyes. The blood soaking his side had begun to darken, thick and slow. He looked one bad breath away from collapsing entirely, but when he opened his eyes again, something had sharpened in them. Pain had burned away whatever distance remained, 3 years of silence, and now the truth was arriving all at once, ugly and overdue. It wasn't a courier exchange, Jungkook said, voice rough. It was a funeral. The word dropped into the room like a stone. Jimin said nothing. Jungkook swallowed hard, gaze fixed on the black phone as if the memory lived inside it. There was a man named Han Seojun. He ran logistics for them, not high enough to be seen, important enough to know where everything was buried. Accounts, names, payments, bodies, he handled the quiet parts. Jungkook's voice thinned, but he kept going. Then one winter he decided he was tired of being useful. Yuna went still beside the altar. Jimin felt it then, that subtle shift in the room when 2 people recognized the same ghost. He stole the ledger, Yuna said quietly. Jungkook nodded once. He tried to sell it before they could kill him. No one bought fast enough. Bell above them creaked in the wind. Jungkook's mouth twitched, not with humor. They buried him first. Felt cold settle in his bones in a way the snow had never managed. The funeral was fake, Jungkook said. No body in the casket, just a message. A closed service in a chapel no one questioned because everyone attending already belonged to him or feared him. I was there to deliver a phone. Stared. A phone. Jungkook's eyes flicked to the altar. That phone. The black receiver sat silent and gleaming under fractured moonlight. I was told to place it on the altar and leave, but it rang before I could. No one breathed. Jimin could almost hear it. The imagined shrill cut of sound in a dead chapel years ago, a younger Jungkook standing where he stood now, holding a device no one had touched and hearing it come alive. I answered, Jungkook said. Yuna shut her eyes once like she already knew the shape of what came next, a mistake, a fatal one. There was a man on the line, Jungkook said. Older, calm, he asked me if I was loyal. Wind pressed harder against the chapel walls, Jimin's fingers tightened against Jungkook's coat. I thought it was a test, I said yes. Jungkook's laugh this time was barely more than breath. He told me to open the casket. Even Yuna looked unsettled now. Jimin watched Jungkook's face hollow under memory. There was no body, just the ledger, and a note with one sentence. Jungkook's voice dropped so low Jimin nearly missed it. If you're hearing this, he chose you next. The chapel seemed to contract around them. Jimin's mouth had gone dry. Who was on the phone? Jungkook looked at him. For 1 second, all the fear he had spent years hiding rose cleanly to the surface. I never knew his name. Yuna exhaled sharply through her nose. Everyone else did, she said. Jimin turned to her. Yuna's face had gone unreadably still. They called him the bellkeeper. The name landed wrong, too old, too deliberate, like something inherited rather than chosen. Jimin said nothing. Yuna continued, her voice stripped of everything but fact. Never appeared in photographs, never used the same number twice, never spoke to the same person in person if a phone would do. He built the network no one could trace and kept it clean by removing anyone who became a liability. Journalists, politicians, police, handlers, if your name entered his ledger you were either already owned or already dead. Looked at the telephone again. Jungkook answered. Yuna gave one short nod, which means Han didn't choose him. Her eyes shifted to Jungkook. The bellkeeper did. Hit harder than shouting. Jimin felt something awful click into place, the years of pursuit, the patience, the strange precision of it, not revenge, selection. Jungkook had never simply run from them, he had been marked. Jimin turned to Jungkook and the question came out harsher than he intended. Why you? Jungkook's face changed. For the first time all night he looked ashamed, not afraid, ashamed. I didn't just take the ledger, he said quietly. I took the call log. Yuna swore under her breath. Jimin stared. The what? Jungkook swallowed. The ledger had names, payments, enough to expose them. But the call log, his gaze slid back to the phone. That was the real spine, every routed number, every dead line. Every shell switchboard, every private extension tied to the bellkeeper's network. The ledger could ruin people. Looked at Jimin then, and Jimin felt the full weight of what came next before Jungkook even said it. The call log could destroy the whole system. Outside, a branch snapped. All three of them went still, voices, close now, not at the lake, in the trees. Yuna moved first, crossing to the nearest window and peeling back the edge of the curtain by less than an inch. Her jaw tightened. They tracked us. Jimin's pulse slammed. How many? 4 I can see. Chapel suddenly felt very small, very old, very easy to burn. Jungkook pushed himself upright with visible effort, face white with pain. He said too quickly. Yuna turned. No what? They're not here for the ledger. The certainty in his voice froze them both. Jimin looked at him. Then what are they here for? Jungkook's eyes lifted slowly to the black telephone on the altar. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. They are here because it's going to ring again.
The first ring shattered the chapel before anyone could answer. It cut through the room so sharply Jimin felt it in his teeth. Not loud, not shrill, just precise, one clean metallic chime from the black telephone on the altar, delicate as a bell in winter and somehow more violent than gunfire. No one moved. The sound lingered in the candle-cold air, vibrating through old stone and older fear. Then the second ring came. Jimin flinched. Yuna's hand was already on the pistol at her back, though even she looked absurdly human for a second, caught between instinct and superstition, between the practical terror of armed men outside and the deeper dread of a phone that should not exist ringing in an abandoned chapel in the middle of nowhere. Jungkook had gone very still, not frozen. Listening. Jimin knew that look. He had seen versions of it before in quieter rooms, when Jungkook heard footsteps pause too long outside their apartment door, when an unknown number lit his screen, when silence itself began to feel arranged. He was counting. The third ring sounded. Jungkook's voice came low and immediate. Let it reach 4. Turn to him. What does that mean? But Jungkook was already moving, or trying to. He staggered off Jimin's arm, one hand clamped hard over his side, the other reaching for the altar as if the force holding him upright was no longer blood or bone but pure refusal. Yuna crossed the room in 2 strides and caught him before he fell. You're bleeding through your coat. Then move faster. The 4th ring began, and Jungkook tore the receiver off the cradle. Silence slammed into the chapel so suddenly it roared. Jimin stopped breathing. Jungkook stood bent over the altar, blood slipping steadily through his fingers onto the old wood, the black receiver pressed to his ear. His face emptied in a way Jimin had never seen before. Not fear, not shock, but something colder, recognition. No one on the other end spoke at first. Jimin could hear only the faint static leaking from the receiver, thin and distant like breath crossing a wire. Then Jungkook's mouth tightened. He said, a pause. His expression changed so subtly Jimin might have missed it if he did not know him down to the smallest fracture. Not surprise, disgust. Jungkook said. Another pause, Yuna's eyes narrowed. Jimin could hear nothing from where he stood, not a syllable from the other side, and somehow that silence was worse than hearing a voice at all. Jungkook's grip on the receiver whitened. You should have let him bury it with him. A longer silence. Then Jungkook shut his eyes. For one terrible second, he looked 19 again. Too young. Too tired. Standing in the path of something older and crueler than he had words for. When he opened them, his voice had changed. Whatever softness remained in him was gone. He's not here, Jungkook said. Jimin's stomach dropped. Yuna's head snapped toward him. Jungkook was lying, not for himself, for Jimin. The realization hit so hard it felt physical. He's not here, not we're not alone, not come find out. A clean severing. A shield made of grammar. Something on the other end answered. Jungkook went still. Then very slowly, his gaze lifted to the stained glass window behind Jimin. Jimin turned. At first he saw nothing, then movement. A shape crossing the color-washed glass outside. Someone standing just beyond the chapel wall, too still to be one of the men searching, watching. The static in the receiver sharpened. Jungkook's face lost what little color he had left. He's here, he said quietly, and the line went dead. The chapel exploded inward. The front window shattered in a spray of colored glass and snow as a body crashed through it shoulder first. Jimin barely had time to register dark coat, gloved hand, gun, then Yuna fired. The pistol cracked like lightning in the enclosed space. The man jerked sideways and hit the stone floor hard, blood spreading fast beneath him. Another shot blasted through the wooden door. The iron bolt screamed in its frame. Down, Yuna shouted. Jimin hit the floor as splinters tore through the air where his head had been a second earlier. The chapel erupted into noise. Gunfire, breaking wood, Jungkook's ragged breathing, the brutal metallic ring still echoing in Jimin's skull like it had never stopped. The door buckled, once, twice, then burst inward under the force of a boot. A second man entered low and fast, gun raised. Jimin moved before thinking. He grabbed the fallen lantern from the floor and hurled it. Glass shattered against the man's chest. Oil burst across his coat and ignited in a violent bloom of orange flame. His scream tore through the chapel. He staggered backward into the doorway, burning. Yuna fired again. The shot dropped him hard enough to block the entrance with his collapsing body. Smoke rolled instantly through the room, hot and black and choking. Jimin coughed, eyes stinging. Back, Yuna barked. There's a cellar. She vaulted the altar and tore aside a strip of old carpet behind it. A trapdoor. Of course there was a trapdoor. Jimin should have expected the chapel to have more secrets. Yuna dropped to one knee and jammed the rusted key from the drawer into the iron lock. Another gunshot blew through the remaining window. Stone chipped beside Jimin's face. Jungkook swayed where he stood, one hand braced against the altar, the receiver still hanging loose from his fingers. Jungkook. Jimin lunged for him just as the trapdoor gave with a violent crack. Yuna hauled it open. Cold black air rushed up from below, carrying the smell of damp earth and metal. Move! The front doorway flared with fire and shadow. Men were shouting outside. The body jammed in the entrance would not hold them long. Jimin dragged Jungkook toward the opening. Jungkook stumbled, then stopped so suddenly Jimin nearly lost him. The black telephone still sat on the altar. Jungkook was staring at it. No, not the phone, beneath it. Jimin followed his gaze and saw, carved into the wood under the cradle in letters worn by time, for the one who answers 4 times. Jungkook made a sound so small Jimin almost missed it. Understanding. Horror. Yuna grabbed his collar and dragged him bodily toward the open cellar. Read later. Survive now. Next gunshot tore through the chapel and shattered the last of the stained glass. Jimin shoved Jungkook through the opening first. Yuna followed. Jimin dropped in after them just as boots thundered into the chapel above. Yuna slammed the trapdoor shut. Darkness swallowed them whole.